Hello and welcome to Opinion Machine. My name is Killjoy and I am going to be talking about some opinion-y things today, of course. So today I want to talk about some mechanics used or underused in Hearthstone. For those that you don't know, Hearthstone is a card game. It is made by Blizzard. It's quite a fun little game, but they recently released a new expansion pack for the game with new cards. And I have to say, reading through the cards, doesn't add anything overly new to the game. So, to put this into context, what I've done is I've written down here the mechanics that the game has added in expansions and the adventure modes, because the game has expansion packs of, say, 140 cards, 130 cards, and then adventure modes that are single-player adventures that let you get cards in like fun ways, and that usually add like maybe 40 cards or something. So what I've done is I've gone through all of those to look at the mechanics added after the game's initial release. So we're not talking about the basic mechanics in the game. I'm not talking about things like battle cry or taunt or certain things like that, because there is some crossover with some of these expansions, but certain things added more to those elements. So the first adventure was Naxxramas, and that had a massive focus on Death Rattle. Which was really cool because up to then there wasn't a huge amount of Death Rattle cards. The way that Death Rattle works is quite obvious. When your card dies, an action happens. So the focus on that expansion was 4 wings or 5 wings of playing through these adventure and getting a bunch of cards for all the neutrals and for the heroes, and most of that was a lot of Death Rattle stuff that synergized well with other cards. So that was cool. In Blackrock Mountain, they focused primarily on dragon cards. So you had the whole idea of people making a lot of decks around the idea with dragons. If we come away from the adventures for a minute, we had Goblins vs Gnomes, which was the first big expansion for the game, and that added quite a lot. That added a mech focus on the game, so there was a lot more mech cards added. It added the spare parts cards, which were interesting. Certain cards would give you spare parts, which are little minor buffs, like 1 of 5 or 1 of 4, or whatever it was. Might maybe give something taunt, give it +1, silence a minion, things like that. This was a cool mechanic. I actually really like this mechanic. I feel it was a little bit underused, but in general, that's what most of that did. It also added I think it was the first expansion to have cards that said 50% chance to hit the wrong target. Which there's only a few cards that do that, but again, it was a cool mechanic. With one particular legendary, which causes all of your cards to attack the wrong or 50% chance to attack the wrong target. We then had the Grand Tournament, which in my mind added the 2 biggest additions to Hearthstone, and this is basically what this Opinion Machine episode is going to be mostly about. The 2 mechanics were Inspire and what I call the Joust mechanic. Inspire is a mechanic that requires you to use your hero power. So if you've got a card that says Inspire, give this minion +2/+2, that just means use your hero power that turn. So what this allowed was interesting decks that required you to use your hero powers more, and cards that had cool effects that required you using your hero power. So you'd see things these decks that would be built around the idea of using the Inspire mechanic to buff cards up or cause very specific effects, which I really liked, and I think it's one of the better mechanics added to the game in an expansion. You also had like I said, the Joust mechanic, which is a little bit random, but I kind of liked it as well, where a card would say reveal a minion in your opponent's and yours deck. If yours is higher valued, then this effect happens. So you'd have a card that might gain charge. You play it, you see the top card of your deck, you see the top card of the opponent's deck. If yours is 5 and theirs is 4, then your minion gains charge. If it's a tie or lower than the opponent's, then nothing happens. So that mechanic, while a bit random, I quite like that as well. It meant like certain cards had extra boosts, and depending on the kind of decks you were playing against, you know, if you're playing against a deck with mini creatures, there's a good chance you were going to get the ability that you wanted. Or it's also a good way of seeing what cards they might be drawing from their deck. So it also had cards that would add power or +1/+1 or stats to cards in your hand and possibly cards in your deck. So what that means is if I played a card that said Battle Cry, add +1/+1 to a random card in your hand, that means that one of the cards in my hand would suddenly get a +1/+1. This was very limited use in this. This was something that we saw later on in the newest expansion, used a lot more. But I thought I'd mention it. This is where I think we first saw it. Going back to some of one of the other adventures, League of Explorers, that kind of added the discover mechanic in the game, which was you play a card and it says discover a 1/1 minion, and it would show up a few cards and you get to pick one. Very simple mechanic, but it was cool nonetheless. It meant that you could have cards, and it was another way of getting a lot more cards or spells and things depending on what class you were playing as. So that was good. In the next expansion, which was the Old Gods, that was primarily about you using cards that buffed other cards, or in this case a single card. So the idea was you had the gods, the Old Gods, and one of them was called Kafun, or Kafoon, however you want to pronounce it. And a lot of the cards in this were based around giving the Kafun buff stats. So, or using the fact that if this card had buff stats, you're getting an ability. So for example, you might have a card that says, give your Kafun a +2/+2 wherever he is. So whether he's on the deck, whether he's in your deck, on the board, or in your hand. And there's a lot of cards like this, so you could build these Kafun decks that were all about buffing up this card. And you'd play this card, and depending on what its attack value was at, it would then deal random damage of that amount of attack. So you could drop something on turn 10 or turn 9, where I think it's turn 10 it comes out, and it might have like 14/14, and then it would deal 14 damage. It was a bit ridiculous. It didn't always come out, but it was a ridiculous card. But it also, with that, had the idea that some cards as well, which were like, if your Kafun has 10 attack, gain 10 armor. So it was all really built around this one card and these cards buffing it. And the other sort of thing they added in that expansion was the card ability, like spend all your mana and an effect happens. So you might spend all your mana, however much mana you've spent, if it's 9 or 10, gain that much health, or deal that much damage to a single target. So it was quite a small thing in comparison, but it was something that was added there. Now I'm going to ignore Karazhan because I looked through most of the cards and it doesn't really add anything new. That was the most recent adventure added, but it's very minor stuff. It's just a mixture of stuff. Which brings me on to Gadgetzan, which is the newest expansion, and by far probably the most boring expansion they have added to the game. In terms of mechanics, pretty much everything you used in this expansion has been used before in some hand. Like I was saying earlier with the idea of giving your cards in your hand and your deck plus damage or plus health and stuff, that really hits home in this expansion. They've gone back and done a lot of cards that will be like, give the minions in your deck +1/+1, or things like that. Give a random minion thing like +5. And the only other thing they've really added is the multi-class cards, which are like, it's a card that lots of the classes can use, but they can discover maybe a spell or a minion or something. And to be honest, having read through the cards, it's not that great. And I kind of wanted to tackle this because I feel like the most interesting things they've added to Hearthstone in the last few years is the Inspire mechanic and the Joust mechanic from Grand Tournament. Now, from a guess, I don't know this, I've not been on the forums enough to read or see, but I would guess that most people don't like these mechanics because we don't see new cards added with these mechanics anymore. I don't think there's a single Inspire card in any of the expansions or adventures after Grand Tournament came out. Same with the Joust thing, I don't think there is, there might be. But it's just sad that, you know, this game as a fun game I think is really fun. It's definitely got a lot of issues, and competitive wise I have no care in the world. I don't care about competitive play. I only really care about building crazy decks, and in a past video I've talked about the monetization model of this game, and I'm not a huge fan of it. I feel like the game could do with giving more cards out, especially considering how many there are now. But I think that in total, like, if you're going to make a game like this that is a digital card game, there's a lot of things that you can do with it, and things that you could do that are a bit nuts. And I think the idea that, you know, we see the craziest ideas come up in Tavern Brawl and some legendary cards. But I feel like, you know, when you've added something like Inspire and the Joust mechanic that use the cards and you also use the synergy of your hero power, why have you then gone on and done, you know, added very little of this new expansion? Yeah, okay, I understand that they're trying to cycle some stuff out that will be going out in some of the older expansions and adventures in the standard mode. But that doesn't mean that the cards are that much interesting. All this expansion seems to do is just encourage the idea that you just get lots of cards and just take a lot of these buff cards and just keep buffing up your cards to ridiculous levels. Which just isn't very interesting to me. I'd like to see some, you know, more interesting mechanics added. As a digital game, like I said, they can do a lot more stuff like that. I'm not sure what exactly, because I'm not really the person to ask, but, you know, that they came up with Inspire and Joust and, you know, all these other mechanics, and not to really add anything new in this new expansion is a bit disappointing. I mean, you take one of the legendaries added for class 1, it's just give all the cards in your hand +5/+5. That's not that interesting. Sure, I'm sure it works pretty well, you know, in decks built around, but I feel like the most fun decks you can build with this are kind of the silly ones. Like, I built a deck that's got all weapons. It's a warrior's deck. I don't care if it's actually that great, but it's fun just basically having, you know, all of my cards being weapon cards and a bunch of taunts. So I just keep whacking things. Like, I find that the best time Hearthstone is like fun is during the single player adventure stuff and Tavern Brawl. So make the expansions fun. Like, at least in TGT or Grand Tournament, you had those new mechanics to play around with. In League of Explorers, you had the Discover mechanic, which is, you know, that's just new ways of getting cards and buffing you out. All they've done in this one, it feels like they've just taken a bit from everything, except for Discover and the Joust mechanic, which I think really should be used more. Look at the things you've done. Like, look at the 50% chance to attack the wrong target. Hardly used. I know that this adds more random element to the game, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the game not being super serious, and I think that's what it needs. Like, the game has good humor in it with a lot of the things that the cards say when you put them down and the animations and things like that. Like, some of the best cards are random. Mad Bomber, Madder Bomber. You know, like, it's funny watching that stuff happen. Some of the random spells, or the Tinkmaster Overspark turning a random minion into either a squirrel or a dinosaur. Like, you play at your own risk, but sometimes you have the coolest plays, sometimes they kill you. It's like, that's part of the fun. I'm just hoping that by doing this expansion, that they're not just going to keep adding, like, really boring mechanics. Like, do more with it. Like, there must be things that you can do that you've added in the, you know, that you've added already that are more interesting than just buffing your hand in your deck with stats. That's not exactly that interesting. I mean, I don't play standard anyway, and if it's built the idea up going into standard because other stuff's getting rotated out, then sure. It's like old gods and goblins versus gnomes. Old gods replaced a lot of the cards that were in goblins versus gnomes with just more expensive versions of them with different stats because they cycled it out from standard. Standard to me is whatever, I don't care. Like, I don't play the game seriously. I like playing wild. I like the idea that I can use all of the cards and play those in like the silliest decks I can. I think just add some new ideas to the game that use new mechanics that are fun. If you look at the ones we've already got spare parts, 50% chance to attack, Inspire, Joust mechanic, they add the power to, you know, the cards in your hand, Discover mechanic, spend all your mana type things, and that's kind of it, and the multi-class card. So what's that? That's 8 mechanic ideas that have come after the original game, or at least, you know, been more so. Don't, you know, with this newest expansion, you could have added something new. Maybe there is 1 or 2 cards in there, but it doesn't seem like it just doesn't seem that interesting. Like, the card art is cool, and like whatnot, but generally speaking, it's pretty disappointing in terms of new features that they could have added. Now, I know a lot of the time they like to test this stuff out in the adventure mode to see how well it goes down, but yeah, it's just not great in my opinion. I think what I would like to see is something that causes the game to have like a new mechanic that really does change up things, like Inspire, that requires you to use, you know, your hero power more often. Maybe you do something with weapons a lot more. Maybe rather than just giving cards that buff weapons, like maybe using a weapon in a turn causes to do things to your things. I mean, to do things to your current cards on the playing field. Obviously, that doesn't affect every class, and I mean, I assume it's quite difficult trying to make cards for all classes because most of them play differently. Rogue and Warrior have weapons, so does Paladin, whereas you've got more spell-heavy stuff with like Priest and Mage. But, you know, it's like, even if it's just the neutral minions, do more interesting things with those. Do something that isn't just reuse old mechanics and make it like a massive focus. I hope then whatever single-player content we get next, or whatever expansion we get next, which will probably be about March next year, will be my guess, that they do try something new. Again, I don't know, I haven't put too much thought into it, I'm just disappointed that this new expansion doesn't add something cool. So, anyway, that's pretty much it for me on this topic. I just wanted to sit down and talk about it because it's been kind of annoying looking at the new cards and not really being that interested in getting any. Let me know what you think. Chuck a comment in the comment section below if you want. And I will see you guys next time.